When I first moved into Alderwood Estates, I thought I'd found a slice of peace. The streets curved softly through old oak trees, houses wore their individuality proudly, and the air smelled faintly of pine and weekend barbecues. After years in the city, noise, neighbors I never met, sirens echoing through thin apartment walls, this place felt like the quiet I'd earned. At least that's what I believed. Before I met her. Before I realized that serenity here came with surveillance. It started small. A note on my porch, written in careful cursive, "Please park within your driveway limits, HOA Policy 4.3. No name, no signature, just the HOA logo in the corner. I didn't think much of it. I'd slightly overlapped the line. Nothing dramatic. But a week later, another note appeared. Then another, one about my trash bins, one about the brightness of my porch light, one about a guest who stayed past community guidelines. That's when I first saw her, Marilyn Voss. She stood across the street that afternoon, pruning her rose bushes like she was auditioning for a gardening commercial. Mid-50s, silver blonde bob, pressed khaki slacks, and a pearl necklace that seemed too formal for yard work. She smiled when she saw me looking, a tight-lipped, performative smile that never touched her eyes. "New homeowners sometimes miss the rules," she said, not quite loud enough to sound rude, but clear enough that I couldn't pretend not to hear. "I like to help people stay in compliance." I nodded politely. "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind." She tilted her head, squinting slightly. "Oh, I'm sure you will. We like responsible neighbors here." I should have known then. That was a warning, not a welcome. "I'm Caitlin Monroe, 31, freelance designer, quiet by nature, not the type to ruffle feathers. I'd chosen Alderwood Estates because I wanted calm, because after my divorce, I needed a place where I could heal, build something that was mine. But Marilyn, she wasn't interested in calm. She was interested in control. The first time I realized she was watching me wasn't even subtle. I was unloading groceries one evening, juggling too many bags, when a small red light blinked from her upstairs window. At first, I assumed it was a smoke detector. Then it moved, tilted, followed me. I froze, half hidden behind my open trunk. Was that a camera? I laughed it off that night. Maybe it was a trick of light. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then, over the next few weeks, I noticed her subtle choreography. Whenever I left my house, her curtains shifted. When delivery drivers stopped by, her blinds trembled. When friends visited, 2, maybe 3 times total, she seemed to appear outside watering her plants or checking her mailbox, always with her phone in hand. One evening, I was on my front steps talking to my best friend Harper when Marilyn walked by holding a leash with no dog attached. She waved with that artificial politeness. "Evening, Caitlin. New visitor?" "Just my friend," I said, forcing a smile. "We're catching up." "Oh, of course. I only ask because HOA rules require registration for overnight guests." "She's not staying overnight." "Oh." Marilyn's smile widened. "Good. Just making sure everything stays in order." Harper leaned toward me when Marilyn was gone. "Who is that?" I sighed. "Marilyn, the neighborhood's self-appointed warden." Harper frowned. "Creepy. You think she's—" "Yes," I whispered. "Recording us. I've seen the lights." Harper gave a low whistle. "You should talk to the HOA." I did. They said she's part of the safety committee. "Safety?" Harper scoffed. "She's running a spy ring." It was supposed to be funny, but the more I thought about it, the less I laughed. A few nights later, I saw her again, this time standing in her driveway in a robe at nearly midnight, staring directly at my house. The red blink glowed again in her window. That was it. Enough was enough. The next morning, I drove to City Hall. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, maybe reassurance, maybe legal advice, but I ended up in a small office where a young clerk with a name tag that read Daryl handed me a stack of local ordinances. Surveillance cameras are allowed on private property, he explained, but they can't record beyond the owner's boundary lines. If she's got anything pointed at your yard, that's a privacy violation. I leaned forward. And if she does? He smiled. Then she's in trouble. That night, I stood outside with my phone, flashlight on, scanning Marilyn's window. It took a few minutes, but then I saw it. The camera lens, nestled behind her lace curtains, tilted down at a perfect angle toward my front door. My heart pounded. My palms went cold. She'd been recording me all along. I needed proof. I spent the next few days reading privacy laws, consulting an online lawyer, and drafting a formal request under the state's privacy statute. According to the law, I was entitled to copies of any footage that captured me or my property within her recordings. I printed the request, signed it, and walked straight to her front door. She opened it like she'd been expecting me. "Caitlin, what a surprise!" "Hi, Marilyn," I said evenly, handing her the envelope. "I'm requesting copies of any footage you've recorded that includes my house or visitors. State law allows me to." Her expression froze. "Excuse me? It's a formal request. You have 5 business days to comply." She blinked, smile gone now. "You're overreacting. I only record for safety. Then there's no problem providing it." The silence between us stretched thin and sharp. Finally, she forced another smile, though her jaw twitched slightly. "Of course, if that's what makes you comfortable." I walked away without looking back, but I felt her glare burning into my spine. Days passed, no response. Then came the retaliation. Another HOA letter, claiming my mailbox color was non-compliant. Another about noise disturbances at 9 p.m. I didn't even own speakers. My recycling bin blocking the sidewalk. Every letter signed with the HOA logo. Every word meant to unsettle me. But what Marilyn didn't realize was that I'd already contacted the HOA's corporate branch, the national office, not our local chapter. I sent them everything. Timestamps, photos of her cameras, even her messages on the neighborhood app where she'd written things like keeping an eye on new homeowners. I didn't accuse. I simply presented facts. It took a week before the cracks started showing. The first sign was the HOA board emails sent to all residents. Reminder: personal surveillance equipment must not record neighboring properties. Violations will result in disciplinary action. The second was the sound of a ladder outside Marilyn's house that following Sunday. I peeked through my blinds and saw 2 maintenance men removing her cameras, one by one. Marilyn stood in her driveway, arms crossed, lips pressed so tightly together they'd turned white. When she saw me watching, she gave a brittle, furious smile and turned away. For the first time since moving in, I felt safe. But Marilyn wasn't done. 2 days later, I found a handwritten letter slipped under my door. "You think you've won, but people here remember who causes trouble." I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't threatening in words, but the implication was clear. She wanted me to feel isolated, unwanted. And maybe, for a moment, it worked. Neighbors stopped waving as much. Conversations quieted when I passed. Marilyn had influence here. Years of friendships built through gossip and manipulation. That's when I realized she wasn't just a control freak. She was powerful because she controlled the narrative. She told the story, and everyone listened. So I decided to change the story. Over the next month, I started small, volunteering for HOA events, hosting a small block brunch with Harper and another neighbor, Ella, who had quietly told me she'd also gotten compliance letters after disagreeing with Marilyn. The more people I spoke to, the more patterns I saw. Marilyn used safety to control and fear to maintain loyalty. By the time the next HOA election came around, I'd done my homework. I nominated Ella for HOA president, supported by a small but determined group of residents tired of the micromanagement. Marilyn, of course, ran against her to maintain standards. It was the tensest meeting I'd ever attended. Marilyn sat across the room, smiling like a politician, thanking everyone for their faith in her leadership. But when it came time for public comments, I stood. "Before we vote," I said, my voice calm but carrying, "I think it's important everyone knows what kind of leadership we've had." I turned my phone toward the projector screen behind me. The footage appeared, grainy but clear. A timestamp from Marilyn's own camera, showing me unloading groceries late at night, my face illuminated by headlights. A voice in the background, her voice, muttering, "Gotcha." Gasps rippled through the room. Under state law, I continued, this footage was obtained through a privacy request. It proves Marilyn Voss illegally recorded residence beyond her property. Not just me, others too. Some of you have been on her tapes. The room buzzed with whispers. Marilyn's face drained of color. That's out of context. No, I said quietly. It's exactly in context. The vote that followed wasn't even close. Ella won by a landslide. And Marilyn? She didn't just lose her position. The HOA suspended her membership for privacy violations and harassment. Within weeks, the for sale sign appeared on her lawn. When she moved out, I watched from my porch. Her eyes met mine one last time. There was no smile this time, just exhaustion, defeat, maybe even a hint of shame. Harper came by that night, handing me a glass of wine. "So," she said, clinking her glass against mine, "the neighborhood's safe again?" I smiled. "Safer, but I've learned something." "What's that?" "That silence isn't peace. It's just quiet control. Real peace is when you can live without being watched." She grinned, spoken like someone who just took down a suburban dictator. I laughed, but inside I felt something deeper. Not victory, closure. Because in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming space. My space. My story. And that story, finally, belonged to me.
You've just stepped into her revenge side, where every wound finds its justice, and every silence ends with truth. If her story struck a chord, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. Another secret waits in the next video. See how her revenge begins.